You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to dive into the big, bad world of people and culture. I've got a guest who has a lot of great ideas about that, some toolkits and best practices that she's going to share with us. Her name is Jen Thornton. She's the founder of 304 Coaching, and there's a story in that, so we'll talk about it. But Jen, welcome to the show.
Welcome and thank you. And I'm excited to have a conversation with you today.
You bet. As I kind of teased in, the whole topic of people and the ultimate culture we build in our businesses is a really sensitive one. There are formal studies and there's practical anecdotal experiences that says, when I don't have the right people on the bus, I have a problem. If I can identify the right ones, I can conquer the world. So let's kind of start there maybe and tell us a little bit about your thinking and belief on that early process of even identifying what you need and what you want on your team.
Oh, it's such a big topic of like who to hire, how to hire them, how to make them successful. There's so many ways we can think about it and look into it. I think at its early levels and some of the things you want to think about is making a great hiring decision is knowing what work you need to have done. And too often we kind of skip that. We might be just overwhelmed, or someone just says, I can't get all the work done, or, we're just growing. We need to hire people. And so it comes from a place of frantic. It comes from a place of overwhelm. It doesn't come from a place all the time of what work needs to be done. How do we want to think about that work? And then how will we get that work done? And so oftentimes if someone says, we've got 3 people overwhelmed, I've got to hire someone. My first question is, what work are those 3 people that are overwhelmed doing? Is there any work they shouldn't be doing? Is there any work that's outdated? Is there technology that could take their workload down? And so first we look at that. And then after that, we're like, what work is left over? And does this work make sense for one position? Oftentimes we try to hire 2 brains in one body. And so we want to hire someone who can be analytical and a salesperson at the same time. And those are 2 different brains. And so we also stop and think about that. If I'm trying to help 3 people that do 3 different jobs, can I really hire someone who can think 3 different ways? And so once we start to decide what work needs to be done, how are we going to collect that work into, a job description, for lack of a better word, then I always start to talk about how are you going to measure success with this job? If you can't say how you'd measure success, then do you really need that work done? Because that work, if you can't measure it, you can't say, yes, that makes my organization successful and this is how. Well, is that work that needs to be done? Or again, is that work that shouldn't be done in the first place? And so I think that upfront work allows us then to think about the hiring process completely different. But the work really starts with deciding what needs to be done and how that work actually impacts the long-term success of the organization.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of what you described there, I'm leaning toward and thinking about the small business, the entrepreneurial endeavor. And so often a founder of a company will kind of bolt on people in the early stages just for convenience. And honestly, we all know it may have to do with family and friends, people that are willing. They believe in you as the founder, and so they want to help you, but they don't always have the correct skills and abilities that you ultimately really need. They pitch in, they maybe get paid less than market to do it, and when cash is tight, that's a good thing, and it feels right. But as the company truly starts to take off, owners need to really reassess all of that. And what I encourage clients to do is don't just draw the org chart you've got with the names and the faces that are there, but draw the org chart you need and take all the names and faces off, draw the org chart you need, and then do the tough ask and say, well, does Cousin Bill fit this box? That's what he's kind of doing, but no, he doesn't really fit here anymore. And that's a tough call. It feelings get hurt and things like that. But for the good of the business and the continued growth, it's a hurdle that has to be met.
Absolutely. And especially if it's a small business on a growth pattern, when you think about drawing that org, what do we need today, but what do we need 5 years from now? And knowing where those lines are so you can move into those. So maybe in today's world, Cousin Bill works, but we know in, 12 to 14 months, that might not work. And so then how do we start to think about that? Because we know where we're going, we're able to think about how to make decisions with today's talent. And I think that's an important piece also to think about. And too often we just keep hiring people around people who aren't fit. And so then our payroll gets out of control. And when we're throwing payroll at a problem, the problem just gets bigger because then, the payroll budget starts to take over and, we all know where that ends up.
Yeah, very true. Now, when we were prepping for this show, you shared with me you have an assessment process. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So one of the things that I think is important to think about when you're looking at your hiring process, there are pieces to that. It's not just posting a job on Indeed and interviewing people and hiring your favorite candidates. One of the things we want to really think about is the work behavior traits you expect out of that job. So oftentimes, we could have a job description. We'll just take an HR director. We could have that HR director job description look exactly the same, but we can put it in an established company. We can put it in a fast growing company. We can put it in a company that may be downsizing. The job is different. Job description is the same. Job is very different. And so I use the OAD. It stands for Organization, Analysis, and Design. And that tool, in a very quick 10 minutes on average, helps us understand someone's work behavior. So how assertive they are, how impatient, how detailed, their adaptability, their decision style. And decision style is really important. That's usually where we get in kind of a bump in the road with our relationships because people are trying to make the same decision in very different ways. And this helps us think about that decision style. If you're in a very traditional company where there's not going to be a lot of process changes, if you hire someone highly creative, they're going to get really frustrated because they're going to want to change things and they're going to have damaged relationships because they're going to be questioning everything. If you're in a place that over the next 5 years, you're going to be adapting and scaling your processes every 6 months, then you're going to want to hire someone very creative to say, hey, I know we did it this way for 6 months, but here's the next evolution, the next evolution, and the next evolution. And using the OAD can help in the hiring process to make sure those work traits match how we want them to actually do the work.
Well, again, I think that's so important when we're thinking about trying to design the optimum organization to fulfill the mission and purpose of the business. Again, using the phrase that Jim Collins made popular, get the right people on the bus. And somebody followed up with that and said, yeah, but they got to be in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah. There's a lot going on that bus.
Yeah, there's a lot going on that bus. And so when you talking about this OAD assessment, when do you encourage people to apply that? It's when the candidate is talking to you. You ask them to do that survey?
So we start thinking about that survey as we start to think about that job, as we start to think about that job description, the work. So then we start to say, how do we want this person to show up? How assertive do we need them? How fast paced? How detailed? What kind of decision styles do we want this to have? So we start to think about those things prior to going into those interviews, helps us interview better. And then when we deploy the OAD with our top candidates, typically, then it starts to, we know what we're already kind of looking for. And so in the interviews, we were hearing it or not hearing it, the OAD might confirm it or tell us more. We want to learn about that person. And, there's no perfect candidate for any job in the world. It's just, I wish I had a little easy bake oven and I could make the perfect candidates for everyone. I can't. But you want to make sure that it's the best fit for both sides, because when we make the decision to hire someone, we have asked them to change the course of their professional life and likely their personal life. And as an employer, you have to take that very seriously. And so all that due diligence that you do not only allows you to have a great candidate, it allows that person to have a great career move. And I think we have to balance both of those ideas.
Well, I have told the story before here on this show that when one of my last companies, I struggled with hiring effective people to join the team and do the work. And I finally came up with a practical test specific to the work we were needing to do that I asked candidates to perform. And we told them, and in the phone screen, we told them there was going to be this practical test. And half of my phone calls disqualified themselves. They said, "Yeah, well, no, I'm not interested. Thank you."
Yeah.
But then the other half that did show up for the interview, when I would administer the test, it was not an overwhelming thing. It wasn't an SAT or anything like that, but somebody that knew the work and had valid experience in it could perform my little test in about 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the sweet spot for it. There was enough volume there in the test that it took some time to get through, but if you knew what you were doing, you could complete it. And there were some specific, I'm not going to call them trick questions, but there were examples, indicative problems that our people need to be able to identify and call out as they're doing the work. So they were buried in this file, and I could easily, when I got the final result checklist, I could pretty well tell who knew it and who didn't. And it was interesting as we went through that. Sometimes I'd have candidates sit in the conference room for an hour and finally come back with beads of sweat and, and it's like, I don't think I'm qualified to do this. And, no, you're not. Thank you. Thank you for playing. But I tell you, when I started administering that test, the effectiveness of my selections and hiring kind of took a 180 and really started landing me some good people that I could really rely on and get the work done.
I love when people add something like that to the process, whether that's, present, some ideas on a problem, if it's, maybe some actual like test type stuff. But what it also does is when someone completes something and presents it back to you, it also tells you, can I have a conversation and work through business problems with this person? So if they come in and they're just like trying to tell you what they think you want to hear and they just agree with you and you're like, no, I want someone who's going to challenge my thinking. I want someone who's going to think big. And so it really starts to tell you how will you partner and communicate on top of the skill set. And I think that's, an added kind of side benefit of doing something like a project or a test, because you start to learn how will we work through these real life situations together and what will that communication look like naturally.
Now, back to your OAD assessment, again, as we were prepping kind of in the green room, we talked about the legal ramifications of an assessment like that. So tell me what that means.
Yeah. So when you think about using a pre-employment assessment, it's really important to work with the company that you're using to make sure that the assessment is EEOC compliant. And that means that anything that we are asking them to do relates back to actual job functions of the job. And it doesn't discriminate on race, religion, gender, any of those types of things. And it's surprising how many assessments that are widely used in the workplace are not EEOC compliant. And I'd encourage anyone using one just for, one, to be a steward of good culture, make sure your assessment is EEOC compliant. And if you're using it for decisions legally, you want to make sure. But it does have to go back. There's a Supreme Court case that outlines the regulations of that. So it is all in federal law. But it's important that you think about those things. OAD is EEOC compliant, and it does meet the qualifications of that Supreme Court case. And but yeah, it's some of the ones that we hear about all day, every day are not compliant, and some of them are really great in the workplace for team building and different things like that. But if you start to consider, am I going to promote this person? Am I going to put this person in a certain role? and you're thinking back to an assessment you used in team building, if it's not EEOC compliant, you cannot use that information as part of your decision process.
The tagline that I always get from my attorney friends is your business practice defensible in court? And having a tool that is EEOC and any other federal law that might apply compliant is what helps bolster your ability to defend yourself in court when a candidate decides to take you to task because they feel like they were discriminated against or unfairly handled in your hiring process.
Yeah.
And sadly, we are in a world where people are out there doing that.
Absolutely.
And a very well-meaning business owner can get in big trouble really fast.
They can, and it's heartbreaking because a lot of times they don't mean to do it. They just aren't maybe as educated on what they can do. And that goes down to the questions that we ask. Some of those questions that we were given, who knows when, way back when, that have been passed down through the generations. If it doesn't relate back to the business directly, some of my favorite ones, if you were an animal, what animal were you be?
Yeah.
If you were in a band, what instrument would you be? Well, that has no bearing on your ability to do a job. Therefore, it's not a question that we should be asking to do a job. And, we think about the ones around age, religion, race, but there are some of those other classics that have been passed down that also can get us in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a good friend and colleague who is a former HR executive, and he wrote a book, If You Were a Tree, What Kind of Tree Would You Be? And basically challenging that methodology. I don't know where that came from. I think that goes all the way back to maybe the 80s or something like that, as I recall. And I'm sadly old enough to remember those days and the way we did a lot of things. And glad we're not there anymore.
Yes, I'm with you on that. I was told early in my career it would be a great question. I was like, okay, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. So hopefully everyone listening won't ever ask again, what tree are you? What instrument or animal are you? Great for a dinner party, not good for an interview.
Yeah. It's fun for an icebreaker at a social, but not in the workplace.
No.
Well, so if we get through the assessment process and we've selected candidates and they've accepted, let's talk about onboarding.
So onboarding is so important. Obviously, we want people to feel comfortable from day one, and how we start to think about our relationship with our supervisor, our ability to do a great job. It starts to form mentally, subconsciously in our mind. And so we want to make sure that we find ways for our new person to be successful from day one, setting them up for success, building on their skills, really looking at, what do I want this person to accomplish in the next year? How do I start to break that down and think about the things I need them to do in this first 30 to 90 days while they're learning the company, still producing and still having early wins? Because when you wake up after your first 2 weeks and you go to work that first day on that third week, and all you've done has been hitting, walls and failing, guess what? You're going to wake up and feel like you're a failure. And therefore you're going to show up with that mental cloud of, I'm not going to do well today. But if you set someone up to be really successful and for 2 weeks, they've been like knocking it out of the park, that third week, they wake up and they're like, I'm going to knock it out of the park again today. And they're going to show up stronger. They're going to show up with their mind in a place in which they can use their prefrontal cortex in a better way, problem solve, emotional regulate, all of those things. And so I don't think we think about the mental stress it takes to onboard into a new company. We're too worried about them getting work done. But we can have them get work done, but also mentally start to create this mindset of theirs that they are successful in our environment. And therefore, over a long period of time, they will be more successful.
Well, and there's the reflection, the impression from their side of what it's going to mean to work for this company. And just as in any human endeavor, first impression lasts a long time. So I talk about, I do a lot of work with smaller businesses that are in the trade world, the home services space. And when we talk to owners of those companies and we talk about personnel and onboarding and the culture they're trying to develop, if you've got a new candidate and they show up bright and early Monday morning for first day on the job, and you tell them to go sit in the warehouse for a minute while you get your stuff together, well, that minute can turn into 15, 20, 30 an hour, and they're just sitting there feeling very awkward. Nobody knows who they are. People are moving around them and they're not seeing anything. And then finally you call them back into the office to begin the onboarding. That's a horrible start. That is a terrible, terrible first impression. And it might be subconscious. It might seem easy to do, but it needs to be buttoned down in a much more cohesive way. If you know you've got a new employee showing up at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, you better be ready to meet, greet, and move on with it.
Absolutely. Those first hours, first days, first weeks really start to, talk about that success. And also, especially in a small business, you can invite the entire organization to rally around this person and help them be successful. Because in a small business, one person unsuccessful is going to impact everyone. And so also thinking about who are their partnerships, who are the important people they need to build relationships with? Do they know why they need to build a relationship? One of the smaller organizations I work with, the onboarding document has a whole entire section that's key business partners. It has their full name, their work number, and their email. So no one has to go find anything. It's right there in your document. What that person does for the organization and why it matters to them. And then why, and then the time period in which we want them to connect and meet each other, so that not only are they learning their job, they're learning the organization, and they're building relationships fast and early. And that's not just internal employees. It is also external vendors, external consultants. In today's world, it's not just employees. It's a cloud of people that support an organization. And so it's important for them to meet everyone that touches the business that they will come in contact with. And so I think that's an important piece too. That first couple of weeks is helping them build those relationships.
Yeah. And it is, as you were describing that, thought that came to my mind is the old adage, information is power. And we have abused the buzzword empowering our employees, but I think we've probably ultimately lost sight in what that can really mean. And on one hand, you'll run into those owners and managers that say, well, I don't want them to know all that stuff. They could rob me and go start their own business if they learn all that. Well, that's an incredibly short-sighted view of things.
Yes.
But why not? Let's have a really robust and dynamic culture that's producing great work, giving everybody opportunity for success and prosperity, and get this new person involved in that. And then we've got something.
Absolutely. And withholding information it's just cruel. And especially if we're going to hold them accountable for knowing it. And in fact, just this morning in a coaching conversation, I had someone who's onboarding to an organization. She needed some information to do something quickly that the CEO asked them to do. And instead of getting the information, it was like, I've asked you to do it, just do it. And they're like, I'm trying to do it, but I need information. Now I understand why the CEO was overwhelmed. Like I understand, like I can see it all, and I understand it all. But what we did is we held someone back from meeting our expectations that it would have taken us 3 minutes to take care of. We've held now. They still need it. They still need to get the work done. And this person's out floating for hours, digging, trying to find something when someone could have given them clear direction versus just go find it. You shouldn't ask these questions. And now that person's having a bad day and they woke up having a great day. Yeah. And it's pretty early in the morning when we're recording this and they're already having a bad day.
Well, let's move on to the somewhat elusive and mysterious idea of building a new culture at a business. Mm-hmm. I'll throw you the big softball there. How do you typically try to encourage people to think about their culture in their company?
Oh, there's so many great ways to approach it and to think about it. It is a creative process. And that's the first thing that I like to tell people. This is your opportunity to get creative. And if you have an organization, I don't know, full of, engineers who are very process minded, when I start working with them on culture, man, we get the markers and the crayons out and we're drawing and we're doing all kinds of stuff and we're building things and playing with play. Who knows what we're going to do? But building a culture is a creative exercise. It's being creative to imagine a world that is you've yet to see and saying, could we get there? And what is the process of getting there? And so I think a culture, it starts with language and then becomes actions. Oftentimes we try to think about the actions and then the language, but language does create our world. Words is what our world is made of. And so really thinking about how would you describe it? And then pulling some of those words out and giving really clear definitions. That's the other thing. We may say, we want everyone to be, focused on teamwork. Teamwork's our value and part of our culture. Well, what are the behavior anchors that actually say this is what that is demonstrated? And so going down a step further than most organizations do and creating, 5 to 7 anchors. These are the anchors. These are the behaviors that actually create teamwork in our environment. 4 companies can all say a version of teamwork is important to me. All of them will describe it differently. And so those anchors matter. And I think the other thing we often leave out is competencies. And so in a culture, we'll have a purpose, mission statement, something like that. We'll have our values and our way of work, but we don't ever talk about adding our skill set in there. And that's a big piece too, whether that is entrepreneurial mindset, if that's, continuous learning. I don't know what those competencies would be for an organization. There's a long list, but you start to think about not only what work needs to be done, the skills it takes to do it. And now we're also talking about the way we do it. And the way we do it becomes more important than what we just do. And then you start to use that language. One of the exercises I do a lot after we kind of say, okay, this is our culture and this is how we're defining it. I teach people to use it in their day-to-day conversation. And so instead of just saying, oh, great job on that project, we say, wow, great job collaborating with Mike on that project. I appreciate it. Because if collaboration is part of your culture, you have to use that word and call it out and show it. And so we have to not only change the way we work, but we have to change the way we talk, because that's what happens. And, hiring someone is like buying a new little goldfish to put in your pond. You get it in a little bag and it has its own water and you put it in the tank and it has to, kind of get used to it before you can take it out. That's a culture, right? You're taking that goldfish and you're putting it in a new culture. So you have to acclimate it. And language and behaviors help acclimate that new person. So when they come into the environment, it's easy for them to just start swimming with everyone else because it's so cohesive. But if you don't have a strong culture, every single person you put in there is going to be doing their own thing, and who knows what mess you'll have at the end. It's really it's difficult to untangle. Culture needs to happen as early and as often as it can, and starting to make it part of the day-to-day conversation makes it a lot easier to execute.
I have talked with owners and CEOs about this whole development of culture and administration. And the bigger the organization, sadly, what I see happening is there's a project team that gets mobilized. Let's define our new culture or what we want to do. And they may spend literally years hammering through this. And I'm thinking of a case in point. It was a 2-year project.
Oh my gosh.
And they come up with this wonderful, glowing, new words to put on the walls at the headquarters and put in the employee handbook and all that. But then they don't think about what it means to distribute that through the company. Mm-hmm. And one project I was involved with in an executive coaching capacity a number of years ago, that was our challenge to help managers at levels 2, 3, and 4 assimilate this new glowing culture that everybody wanted. And to your point on the language, that was the first boulder we ran into trying to implement this thing, because guess what? The glowing words in the new culture didn't mean the same to everybody in the ranks. We had to do a whole alignment process to say, what does this really mean to you? And how does it apply to your work team? And how can we I kept using the word distill it, still have the end game same meaning, but try to get it to become relevant and pertinent to the rank and file that was in the business. And it was a huge hurdle to try to get through, just the language part of it.
It is a hurdle. And the other thing too is really trying to teach people, what does this mean in my day to day? One of the other exercises I either create or train or, whatever that situation is oftentimes we create playing cards and we have scenarios for different parts of the business or different levels of the business. And we have a card for each value, a card for each competency. And so they can work in teams and say, okay, here is the scenario, the business challenge. What value and what competency am I going to use to solve it? So then they start again to connect this language on the poster to actual work and starting to think about how to apply this new information that they've received to day. And that makes a huge difference too, because then they can start to say, oh, wow, the materials were delivered, 2 weeks late, which meant the customer got it, whatever that scenario is. Well, now that this has happened, what value are we going to use? What competencies are we going to use? How would we solve this? And you can even take it a step further. Anytime you create a project or create a working group, before you get started, you want to align your objectives. So the working group's just not working in circles. If you're using an assessment like OAD, you can say, here are all of our different personalities. What are we all bringing to the table? How do we appreciate our differences? So we've got that. Now let's talk about what values of the organization, what companies of the organization are we going to be really focused on to get the best work done? And you take all of that information and then you start to execute that project. You're going to see a very different result than if you just said, hey, y'all over there, could you go get that done? And hope for greatness.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Again, the words are on the wall. Don't you get it? Don't you believe it? Don't you follow that? No, I like that idea of making it really come to life. And I'm thinking of a company I know that the CEO has adopted a mantra. His core value for the whole business is do the right thing. And, on one hand, not to be facetious, but on one hand, you hear that and you go, yeah, whatever, and what does that mean? But to quiz him on it, he will say, no, he said, it literally comes down to if I have to eat money because my guys did something wrong, the right thing is to make it right. And if it costs me something, I don't try to roll that in elsewhere in the budget on this project and get my money back from the customer. If we clearly made a mistake, we're going to make it right. And he said, we do that, and customers know that. All the people we work for know it, and that's why we get the repeat business we do, and that's why we have the long-standing relation. This happens to be in commercial construction, and those are big ticket projects, and they don't come around real regular. I mean, you've got to know developers that are putting these properties together, but you build relationships with them, and when they know you're the guy that's going to do the right thing, that has a lot of horsepower in the market.
It does. And, if you really talk about do the right thing all of the time, people think about it from the customer, but also thinking about it internally. And so when you think about those behavior things, it may be, calling out a defect early and often and finding the best case scenario to correct. It also could be, internally, if someone, is struggling with, having a situation, how do we support that person through that situation? And it's, when you think about do the right thing, always think about internally and externally, and you'll have employees that are there forever. You'll have customers that are there forever. It's easy to say, I'll do the right thing and eat the money, because you've got the business and the profits there to be able to do it. But if you're constantly trying to cheat and do the right thing for you personally and not for everyone else, then you can't do it for others because you won't have the financial means to do it.
Right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit, Jen. I am curious. Your company's called 304 Coaching. You tell me there's a story that goes with that. What is it?
Oh, there's always a story somewhere with me. So how it happened by accident is that I had made the decision to start a coaching. I was just going to be a coach. That's how this was going to start. And this was many years ago. Now, we're a full talent strategy agency. But someone I had worked with in the past had gone to a new organization. I was still working my job, planning all of this. And she called and was like, hey, I need you to come pitch to my CEO tomorrow. And this is like late in the afternoon when I get this phone call. We're going to hire a coach for our entire ELT team. And I want it to be you, but I need you to come pitch to him tomorrow. And I'm like, I haven't left my job yet. I don't have a company name. I don't even know how to do a pitch deck. I was like, I don't know any of this. And I was like, but you know what? I will figure it out. And so that night I'm like trying to figure it out. And I was like, what am I going to name this company? And everything seemed so silly because I was like, Coach for Life. Like it was just nothing worked. And I was like, you know what? 304. It's a lucky number I've used for years. It's a combination of dates that are important to me. And I thought, well, I'll just call it 304 for now. And then later I'll fix it. Well, later I got that job. They're still a client today. And I never looked back or had a second to fix it. And that's how it became 304 and will always be 304. And it was just by figuring it out, jumping in and not worrying about stuff that doesn't matter and worrying about the stuff that does matter. And what I named my company at that time, I was like, oh, it won't matter. I'll change it. And now it's a great conversation starter. I didn't think of that either at the time.
Right. Well, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there any other way people can get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more?
Absolutely. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Jen Thornton. You can go to 304coaching.com. You can also check out my podcast at letsfixleadership.com.
Great. Well, Jen, thank you so much for sitting in. I think this has really been helpful, and I really appreciate all your hard work and effort, and thank you.
Thank you for a great conversation. I always enjoy our conversations together.
You bet. Well, with that, folks, we're going to wrap this up. As always, we will have the links that Jen mentioned. They'll be in the show notes, so hop down there and click on, and you can find out more about her and her work. I do like to remind people, if you're listening on your favorite audio streaming, we are on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives, past episodes, etc. Take a look, see if there's other ideas that you come up with that you want me to know about so we can pack that into a new show down the road. But with that, we're going to say goodbye. Go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.